Success doesn't fall apart because you lack talent. It falls apart because the mind was never disciplined enough to carry it. Every goal you abandon starts the same way. Not with failure, but with hesitation, with emotional reactions replacing clear decisions. Stoicism was never about chasing outcomes or waiting for motivation. It was about building inner order before touching the outer world. The Stoics understood that a disorganized mind will sabotage even the greatest opportunity, while a disciplined mind can turn chaos into progress. Marcus Aurelius ruled under war, betrayal, and constant uncertainty. Yet his writings were not obsessed with victory or recognition. They were focused on restraint, clarity, and mastery of the self, because he knew that without control of the mind, power becomes a liability. This video is not here to make you feel inspired. It is here to train how you think, to show you why discipline must come before success, why controlling your reactions changes your direction, and why, once the mind is governed, everything else begins to fall into place. 1. Discipline comes. Before motivation, discipline is not something you turn on when you feel ready. It is something you practice precisely when you do not. Motivation is unreliable. It rises and disappears without warning. If your actions depend on how you feel, your progress will always be fragile. Stoicism rejects the modern obsession with waiting for the right mood. The Stoics understood that emotions are weather, not direction. They change constantly, and building a life around them guarantees inconsistency. Discipline, on the other hand, is a decision you make once and execute daily, regardless of inner resistance. Marcus Aurelius wrote about mornings when his body begged to stay in bed. He did not negotiate with that feeling. He reminded himself that he was born to do the work of a human being, not to seek comfort. That single principle separates disciplined minds from drifting ones. When you wait for motivation, you place your future in the hands of impulse. When you act through discipline, you take ownership of your direction. This is why disciplined people appear calm under pressure. They are not stronger emotionally. They are simply not governed by emotion. Think about how goals are usually abandoned, not because they are impossible, but because discomfort arrives early. The mind encounters resistance, fatigue, boredom, or doubt, and immediately searches for relief. Discipline closes that escape route. It teaches the mind to stay present and continue despite internal noise. This does not require extreme willpower. It requires removing negotiation. A disciplined mind does not ask, "Do I feel like doing this today?" It asks, "Is this aligned with who I decided to become?" Once that decision is made, action follows automatically. In modern life, this applies everywhere. Training happens whether energy is high or low. Work begins before confidence appears. Difficult conversations are faced instead of postponed. Discipline turns intention into behavior. The Stoics practiced this through small, consistent actions. They understood that character is not built through intensity, but through repetition. Each disciplined choice strengthens the mind's authority over impulse. Over time, hesitation weakens and clarity takes its place. You do not become disciplined by waiting for discipline to arrive. You become disciplined by acting while resistance is present. This is where momentum is born, not from excitement, from obedience to your own principles. And once the mind learns to move without permission from emotion, motivation eventually follows behind it. 2. Control your reactions. Control your direction. The moment you lose control of your reactions, you surrender control of your life. Not to circumstances, but to impulse. Most damage is not caused by what happens to you. It is caused by how quickly and emotionally you respond to it. A disciplined mind does not eliminate emotion. It refuses to let emotion sit in the driver's seat. Stoicism begins with a brutal but freeing truth. You do not control events, people, or outcomes. You control your judgments, your responses, and your behavior. Everything else is noise. When this distinction is ignored, life becomes reactive and chaotic. Epictetus made this clear centuries ago. He taught that external events have no power over you unless you hand it to them through interpretation. The insult, the delay, the rejection, the disrespect, none of these determine your direction. Your reaction does. Observe how most setbacks spiral. A comment triggers anger. Anger triggers impulsive words or avoidance. Those actions create consequences that were never necessary. The original event was small, but the reaction magnified it into damage. A disciplined mind interrupts this chain. It creates space between stimulus and response. That space is where power lives. It is the difference between a controlled course correction and a reckless emotional turn. This is why Stoics trained themselves to pause, not as a weakness, but as a strategic advantage. A pause prevents regret. A pause preserves dignity. A pause allows reason to return to the front of the mind. In modern life, this discipline is constantly tested. An email feels disrespectful. A message goes unanswered. Plans fall apart without explanation. The undisciplined mind reacts instantly, seeking relief through expression. The disciplined mind asks a different question. What response serves my long-term direction? That question changes everything. It shifts attention away from ego and toward control. Instead of defending pride, you protect clarity. Instead of reacting to emotion, you choose alignment. Stoicism offers a simple but demanding protocol. Pause before responding. Name the emotion without feeding it. Choose an action that reflects your values, not your mood. This process feels unnatural at first because it denies impulse its reward. But over time, the mind learns restraint. Emotional storms lose their authority. You stop being dragged by every internal reaction. Your direction becomes steady, even when circumstances are not. This discipline does not make you passive. It makes you precise. When action is necessary, it becomes deliberate. When silence is wiser, it becomes effortless. People often mistake emotional control for suppression. Stoicism teaches the opposite. Emotion is acknowledged, but it is not obeyed. You feel anger without becoming it. You experience frustration without acting from it. This is how direction is protected. Not by avoiding difficulty, but by refusing to let difficulty dictate your behavior. Over time, something subtle happens. Fewer situations control you. Fewer people provoke you. Your internal world becomes quieter, clearer, and harder to destabilize. A disciplined mind does not need to win every moment. It needs to stay aligned. And alignment, maintained through controlled reactions, is what quietly determines where your life goes. 3. Train the mind like a weapon. A weak mind is not a character flaw. It is a training issue. No one expects strength without resistance, yet many expect mental stability without pressure. They avoid discomfort, avoid effort, avoid silence, and then wonder why their focus collapses the moment life becomes demanding. Stoicism never promised comfort. It promised capability. The mind, like the body, adapts to what it is repeatedly exposed to. If it is constantly fed ease, stimulation, and escape, it becomes fragile. If it is regularly challenged in controlled ways, it becomes resilient. This is why the Stoics deliberately trained discomfort rather than running from it. Seneca wrote about practicing poverty while living in wealth, not to suffer, but to remove fear. He understood that when the mind learns it can endure less, it stops panicking at the thought of losing more. Voluntary discomfort was not punishment. It was preparation. Modern life removes nearly all necessary friction. Food is instant. Entertainment is endless. Discomfort is labeled as something to fix rather than something to learn from. As a result, the mind grows impatient, reactive, and easily overwhelmed. Training the mind means reintroducing resistance on purpose, not recklessly, deliberately, in small doses that build tolerance without breaking stability. This begins with doing what is slightly uncomfortable before what is easy. Starting the difficult task first, sitting in silence instead of reaching for stimulation, completing obligations without waiting for emotional alignment. Each of these moments teaches the mind the same lesson. I can act without comfort. Cold exposure, physical exertion, fasting, and controlled restraint were tools the Stoics used for this reason. Not because hardship is virtuous by itself, but because it sharpens perception and discipline. When the mind realizes discomfort will not destroy it, fear loses its leverage. This training also applies to thought, allowing boredom without distraction, allowing uncertainty without immediate reassurance, allowing criticism without emotional defense. These experiences strengthen mental endurance far more than affirmation ever could. A disciplined mind does not seek constant relief. It seeks readiness. It understands that avoidance creates fragility, while exposure builds stability. This is why disciplined individuals appear calm under pressure. They have rehearsed discomfort long before it arrived uninvited. There is a difference between suffering and training. Suffering is chaotic and imposed. Training is intentional and measured. Stoicism teaches you to choose the second, so the first loses its power. When you choose small discomforts daily, large discomforts become manageable. The mind stops dramatizing challenge. It stops interpreting resistance as a signal to retreat. Instead, resistance becomes a familiar signal to engage. This shift changes how effort feels. What once felt heavy becomes normal. What once triggered avoidance becomes routine. The mind adapts quietly, without ceremony. Over time, discipline replaces fear as the governing force. You no longer ask whether something will be uncomfortable. You ask whether it is necessary. That single question eliminates countless internal debates. Training the mind also creates clarity. When distraction is reduced, intention becomes visible. When comfort is limited, values rise to the surface. You begin to see what truly matters when ease is no longer the default. This is why Stoicism does not aim to make life pleasant. It aims to make you capable. A disciplined mind does not need perfect conditions. It functions under pressure. It remains steady when stimulation disappears. And once the mind has been trained this way, success no longer feels intimidating. It feels manageable. Because the same discipline that carries you through discomfort is the discipline that sustains achievement without collapse. 4. Focus only on what you control. Mental discipline collapses the moment attention is invested in the wrong place. Most inner tension does not come from difficulty itself. It comes from trying to control what was never yours to command. Stoicism is built on a simple but unforgiving distinction. Some things depend on you. Some things do not. Peace, focus, and discipline only exist when this line is respected. The Stoics observed that the mind becomes unstable when it chases outcomes, approval, timing, or other people's behavior. These elements are unpredictable by nature. Building emotional investment around them guarantees frustration. Discipline is not strengthened by force, it is strengthened by correct placement of attention. Epictetus made this the foundation of Stoic practice. Your opinions, judgments, desires, and actions belong to you. Reputation, results, recognition, and external reactions do not. When this order is reversed, the mind becomes reactive and anxious. When it is honored, clarity returns. Modern life constantly pressures you to violate this boundary. Algorithms reward comparison. Work environments reward visibility. Social spaces reward reaction. Each of these pulls attention toward what cannot be controlled and away from what must be governed. A disciplined mind resists this drift. It repeatedly brings attention back to effort, intention, and behavior. Not because outcomes do not matter, but because they cannot be commanded directly. The Stoics understood that indirect control is the only form of real control. Think of it as steering a ship through a storm. You do not command the wind or the waves, you adjust the rudder. Fixating on the storm only exhausts the crew. Focusing on the rudder keeps the vessel moving. This principle applies to every domain of life. You do not control whether someone respects you. You control whether your actions deserve respect. You do not control whether progress is noticed. You control whether progress is made. Discipline strengthens when the mind stops arguing with reality. Complaining about what should be different drains energy. Accepting what is while acting on what can be changed restores momentum. This is not resignation, it is precision. To practice this discipline, the Stoics recommended constant mental auditing. When tension arises, ask a single question. Is this within my control? If it is, act without delay. If it is not, release it without resistance. This sounds simple. It is not. The mind prefers to obsess over outcomes because they promise certainty. But certainty is an illusion. Control of action is the only stability available. When this discipline is maintained, anxiety decreases naturally. Not because problems disappear, but because attention stops scattering. You stop rehearsing conversations that have not happened. You stop fighting outcomes that have not arrived. Your energy stays grounded in the present task. Over time, this creates a subtle form of power. Others react emotionally to circumstances. You remain anchored to action. They chase results. You refine process. This is how discipline compounds quietly. By narrowing focus to what is yours and refusing to leak energy elsewhere. The mind becomes lighter, not because life is easier, but because it is no longer overloaded with false responsibility. Once attention is placed correctly, effort becomes cleaner, decisions become simpler, progress becomes steady. A disciplined mind does not demand control over life. It accepts its limits and masters what remains. 5. Discipline over pleasure. Every breakdown in discipline begins with a small bargain. Just this once, just for today, just to feel better. Pleasure itself is not the enemy. The problem begins when pleasure becomes a requirement rather than a reward. Stoicism never taught the rejection of enjoyment. It taught freedom from dependence on it. The modern world is engineered to keep the mind chasing stimulation, endless scrolling, instant entertainment, constant novelty. Each offers relief without effort, and each quietly weakens the mind's tolerance for difficulty. When comfort becomes the default, discipline feels like a threat. The Stoics viewed pleasure as a preferred indifferent. It could be enjoyed, but never obeyed. Once pleasure dictates behavior, self-control collapses. A mind that cannot tolerate temporary discomfort will always choose what feels good now over what builds strength later. This is where discipline separates itself from denial. Discipline does not suppress desire, it delays it. That delay is what creates leverage. It restores choice where impulse once ruled. Think about how often progress is postponed for relief. Work is delayed because distraction is easier. Training is skipped because rest feels better. Conversations are avoided because avoidance offers short-term peace. Each choice feels harmless. Together, they shape a direction. The Stoics understood that every decision trains the mind. Each time you choose discipline over pleasure, you reinforce authority over impulse. Each time you surrender to comfort, impulse strengthens its voice. The mind learns from repetition, not intention. Practicing delayed gratification does not require extremes. It begins with awareness, noticing the urge without immediately satisfying it, creating a pause between desire and action. That pause is where discipline grows. In daily life, this might look simple. completing the task before checking the phone, finishing training before seeking rest, speaking honestly instead of choosing ease. These moments seem small, but they reshape behavior over time. Stoicism teaches that short-term pleasure often disguises long-term cost. The cost is not always visible immediately. It appears as lost momentum, as weakened confidence, as the quiet realization that self-trust has eroded. Discipline repairs that trust. When you repeatedly act in alignment with your values instead of your cravings, the mind stabilizes. You stop needing constant reassurance. You stop negotiating with yourself. Your word begins to mean something again. This is why disciplined individuals appear confident without performance. They are not trying to prove control. They experience it internally. They know they can tolerate discomfort without collapsing. Over time, pleasure regains its proper place. It becomes enjoyment rather than escape, reward rather than refuge. The mind no longer clings to it out of fear. This shift changes how effort feels. Effort stops feeling like punishment. It becomes evidence of alignment. Discipline stops feeling restrictive and begins to feel stabilizing. A disciplined mind does not reject pleasure. It refuses to be ruled by it, and in that refusal, it gains something far more valuable than comfort. It gains direction. 6. Detach from outcomes. Commit to process. The mind loses discipline the moment success becomes the obsession. When outcomes become the goal, every setback feels personal. Every delay feels like failure. Every obstacle feels like a verdict on your worth. This emotional attachment is what causes people to abandon discipline when results arrive slowly. Stoicism offers a different orientation. You're not responsible for outcomes. You're responsible for conduct. This distinction changes everything because it removes the ego from the result and places responsibility back where it belongs. Epictetus taught that your role is to act well, not to guarantee results. The archer controls the aim, the posture, the release. The wind, the distance, the final landing are never fully his. Judging yourself by the arrow's landing rather than the quality of the shot guarantees instability. Modern life conditions the mind to tie identity to outcomes. Metrics, recognition, external validation. When these fluctuate, so does motivation. Discipline collapses because it was never rooted in process to begin with. A disciplined mind reverses this relationship. It commits fully to the actions it controls and releases attachment to the rest. This does not mean indifference. It means precision. Energy is invested where it can actually produce influence. Think about sustainable success in any field. Athletes train regardless of applause. Craftsmen refine skill without audience. Builders focus on foundations long before structures are admired. They do not chase results. They create conditions where results eventually appear. Stoicism removes impatience from the equation. When effort is valued for its own integrity, progress becomes steady. You stop rushing outcomes. You stop cutting corners. You stop abandoning discipline when rewards are delayed. This detachment also protects mental stability. When success arrives, it does not inflate the ego. When it doesn't, it does not crush the spirit. The mind remains centered because its reference point is internal. In practice, this means redefining success daily. Success becomes showing up as planned, executing the work without negotiation, acting in alignment with chosen principles, regardless of visibility. Each day completed this way reinforces self-respect rather than dependency on results. Over time, something quiet but powerful happens. Confidence grows without performance. Momentum builds without pressure. The mind learns that consistency is enough. This is why Stoics viewed fame, wealth, and recognition as secondary. Not because they are meaningless, but because they are unreliable. Only character and discipline remain available in every condition. When you detach from outcomes, Discipline stops feeling fragile. It no longer rises and falls with circumstance. It becomes structural. It holds even when progress is invisible. Success, when it arrives, feels lighter this way. It is no longer something you cling to. It is something that follows. A disciplined mind does not chase results. It commits to the process that makes results inevitable. 7. Build a daily system that removes choice. Discipline fails most often not because of weakness, but because of excess choice. When every action requires a decision, the mind eventually looks for escape. It negotiates, it delays, it searches for a reason to stop. Stoicism understood this flaw long before modern psychology named it decision fatigue. A disciplined mind does not rely on constant self-control. It removes unnecessary decisions altogether. It replaces choice with structure. This is why Stoic discipline was never abstract philosophy. It was lived as daily order. Marcus Aurelius did not wake up and ask how to feel about his duties. He had already decided who he was. Action followed identity, not emotion. This is the core of a Stoic system. You decide in advance, so you don't have to decide again. Without a system, discipline is fragile. It depends on energy, mood, and circumstance. With a system, discipline becomes automatic. The mind stops debating and starts executing. Clarity replaces friction. A Stoic daily system begins with intention. Each morning you remind yourself of the role you have chosen to play. Not what you hope to achieve, but how you intend to act. This anchors behavior before distractions arrive. Direction is set early, before impulse gains momentum. The system continues with one non-negotiable task. Not a long list, one difficult, meaningful action that must be completed regardless of mood. This trains the mind to associate progress with obedience, not comfort. Everything else becomes optional. Boundaries are the next layer. A disciplined mind knows when to stop consuming, when to disengage, when to protect energy. Stoicism treats attention as a finite resource. What drains it unnecessarily is removed without drama. The evening is where the system closes the loop. Seneca practiced nightly reflection for a reason, not to judge, but to recalibrate. What was done well, where discipline slipped, what must be corrected tomorrow. This review strengthens discipline without shame. It keeps the mind honest. It replaces vague guilt with specific adjustment. Over time, patterns become visible, and what is visible can be corrected. A system like this does not feel exciting. That is its strength. Excitement fades, structure remains. Discipline rooted in routine outlasts motivation every time. Modern life resists this kind of order. It glorifies flexibility. It rewards reactivity. It encourages constant stimulation. Stoicism moves in the opposite direction. By narrowing daily inputs and repeating deliberate actions, the mind stabilizes. Energy stops leaking into distraction. Progress stops depending on inspiration. The system carries you forward, even when enthusiasm disappears. This is why disciplined individuals appear consistent rather than intense. They are not fighting themselves every day. They have already removed the fight. Their environment supports their values. When discipline becomes structural, identity shifts. You stop asking whether you are disciplined. Your behavior answers for you. Confidence becomes quiet. Self-trust becomes stable. A daily system does not guarantee success. Stoicism never promised guarantees. It guarantees something more reliable. Order in the mind. And when the mind is ordered, effort becomes sustainable. When effort is sustainable, progress compounds. And when progress compounds long enough, success no longer needs to be chased. Discipline is not a personality trait. It is a practice that shapes the mind through repetition and restraint. Stoicism does not ask you to become rigid or emotionless. It asks you to become governed from within rather than controlled from the outside. When the mind is undisciplined, success becomes unstable. Opportunities feel overwhelming. Pressure feels personal. Progress collapses the moment comfort is threatened. But when discipline is established internally, life loses many of its ways to destabilize you. Throughout this video, the message has remained consistent. Discipline must come before motivation. Reactions must be controlled before direction can be trusted. The mind must be trained before it can carry responsibility, and effort must be focused on what is within your control, not wasted on what never was. Stoicism does not promise an easier life. It prepares you for a heavier one where discomfort is expected rather than feared, one where pleasure is enjoyed but never obeyed, one where outcomes are respected but never worshipped. When you detach from results and commit to process, discipline stops feeling fragile. It no longer depends on mood or circumstance. It becomes structural, quiet, reliable. This is why success follows disciplined minds rather than creating them. Order within produces stability without. Consistency compounds when the mind no longer negotiates with impulse, and self-respect grows when your actions repeatedly align with your values. You do not need more motivation. You need fewer internal debates. You need fewer emotional reactions, and you need a daily structure that removes choice where discipline matters most. Master the mind, and effort becomes sustainable. Sustain effort long enough, and progress becomes inevitable. When discipline governs within, everything else begins to follow.